Thune, the Senate Minority Whip, South Dakota senator, with us right now. The senator just out a very important classified briefing with Senate leadership on this very, very subject. Senator Thune, good to have you back.
Thanks, Neil. Good to be with you.
It looks for the time being, Senator, that the one thing that President Zelensky wants, and he pounds again, no matter whether he's talking with representatives from America or Canada or the European Union, is that coverage of over Ukrainian airspace, and to make sure that that's provided, because that, you know, will change the odds for Ukraine. But it's not happening. How do you feel about that?
Well, to me, Neil, this is what they're asking for, and I think that if we're going to be all in on this and supporting their effort, if they want MiGs, we ought to give them MiGs. If they want drones, we ought to give them drones. If they want SAMs, we ought to give them SAMs. The Ukrainians want to carry the fight. Let them. If they need these weapon systems, then we ought to make it possible for them to help defend the airspace there over Ukraine. And I think at least the speech this morning, at least, was very powerful, very effective, I thought, and everybody had a chance to see it. But it was kind of delivered to the American Congress. The American Congress, I think, has been effective in persuading the Biden administration to provide more lethal aid and to impose stronger sanctions. I mean, many of the steps that the administration has taken, they've taken slowly, and they've kind of been drug into it. But I think to the degree that Zelensky and the Ukrainian people continue to inspire people all over the world, hopefully, at least here in this country, it'll have the desired effect, and the pressure that we can help bring and the American people can help bring on the administration will lead them to at least give them the weapons that they need to fight the fight.
So you're open, Senator, to give him everything he needs and wants, including those MiGs, regardless of how they get into Ukraine?
Right, and there are ways you can do this. I mean, obviously the Poles have wanted to be helpful, the Romanians have wanted to be helpful, but the MiGs that he is asking for and that the neighborhood wants to provide, we ought to help make that logistically possible. It doesn't mean that American pilots are going to be flying planes or we're going to be directly engaged. I'm not for that. But if the Ukrainians want to defend the airspace over their country, we ought to make it possible for them to do that. That's simply doing what we said we would do.
That does part company a little bit, Senator. I apologize. That parts company from the president and his military advisors and some of your fellow Republicans, including Senator Haggerty, was telling me earlier today, that could be an opening to World War III. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think I wouldn't use those words, Neil. I think, frankly, anything that we provide a weapon system, if we give them SAMs and they can shoot Russian planes out of the sky, or we give them drones, you're essentially doing the same thing. Whatever you do, Putin is going to claim you're escalating, because that's what he does. His whole predicate, his business model is all based upon deception and disinformation and lies, and he's trying to convince his people that there's a rationale for them being there and blowing up neighborhoods and indiscriminately killing women and children. People aren't buying that, and I don't think that we should stop at anything short of direct American involvement at giving them the weaponry that they need so that they can defend themselves. That's what they're asking for. Their leader was pleading, I think, with America today, with the Biden administration, with the Congress, and it may take some pushing again, but I think eventually, hopefully, the administration will come to the conclusion that this is something they're going to need. And the longer the Ukrainians can carry this fight, the more likely it is that in the end, Putin's going to make a calculation that this doesn't make much sense. And I think we ought to do everything possible to make that happen.
Senator, in the meantime, there's always hope that something comes of these ongoing talks, more today, but it is unusual when the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, sort of lays out what he calls absolutely specific wordings that are close to, in his words, again, being agreed upon concerning these ongoing talks. One of the things they've talked about, sir, is this idea of Ukraine being still neutral if it were to end, and agree to being a neutral power, not one inclined to join NATO. As you know, President Zelensky seems to have raised that a number of times, that he's not keen on that anyway, that it wasn't going anywhere long before the war in Ukraine. So he seemed to throw that out there as an olive branch to get talks going. But furthermore, the Kremlin says some of the options for Ukraine are modeled on Austria and Sweden as these so-called neutral countries. And I'm wondering if you believe that, and that the Ukrainians should consider that, or that the guy making the offer is the guy, pushing that.
I think that in the end, it's this is going to have to be a decision. Obviously, the President Zelensky and his team would have to consider any offer that's on the table, but it has to be in their best interest. And if the Russians come up with conditions that are agreeable to the Ukrainians, that preserve their sovereignty, that dial down the escalation of this, and hopefully allow them to live in peace and freedom, then that's going to be ultimately a decision to be made by the Ukrainians. And I don't, what is on the table in terms of negotiations, as you said, there's some reporting about that. I don't, it's hard to know exactly what all that entails, but it would be nice if there would be a path forward that would allow Ukraine to maintain its sovereignty, for the Russians to go home, to quit invading, and to quit killing innocent women and children. And short of that, it's hard to see where Ukraine would be agreeable to any other terms. But maybe they'll get there, and I hope they do, because it would be nice to see all the killing stop, and especially of these innocent civilians.
Well, I have you finally, very quickly, Senator. The Kremlin didn't take too kindly to the president saying that Vladimir Putin was a war criminal. Do you think he is a war criminal?
Well, I do. I mean, I think that the things that he's done, and I'm sure he'll make some argument that maybe these were mistakes, they weren't really intended. I don't know what he's going to argue, but this is an unjust, unprovoked war of his own making. He is the aggressor here. He is not the victim. And the steps that they've taken recently, where they start targeting civilians and killing, again, innocent women and children, those are war crimes, and I think he should be held accountable as a war criminal. And I hope that when this is all said and done, there won't be a place he can go in the world where he can find safe harbor. He ought to be a marked person, and I would hope eventually the Russian people are going to turn on him. And it seems like that's happening, although they try and squash any form of resistance in Russia. But at the end of the day, this is somebody who shouldn't be accepted anywhere in the civilized world, and I hope that's at the end of this one of the results that happens.
So at the end of this war, we hope it's soon, and we hope it's peaceful, and we hope without any more horrific airstrikes. But do you think sanctions and punishments that are in effect right now for Russia should continue as long as Vladimir Putin is in charge of Russia?
Well, I think that I would support that. Clearly there'll be a conversation about that if and when the time comes. If he is to withdraw and he gets all the troops off the border and respects Ukraine's sovereignty and allows the Ukrainian people to live in democracy and freedom, then that's an entirely different conversation. But my view would be that as long as he is running Russia, and as long as he is inclined to do provocative things like this in the region, that those sanctions, which are hurting him personally and the cronies around him that he's turned into billionaires, ought to stay in place. Now, you shouldn't punish the Russian people, obviously, but there's got to be some consequence, and ultimately I think that the Russian people are going to hold him accountable, and again, my hope would be at the end of this that he's not on the scene anymore as a leader for Russia, because these are people who I think desperately want to live different lives and are being sold a bill of goods right now with all the disinformation and deception that's used by the Russian leadership to convince them that this is somehow a justified war. It's not. He needs to be held accountable, and those who have had in any way abetted or enabled or assisted in this need to be held accountable as well. Those sanctions ought to stay in place.
Senator, thank you very, very much. Senator John Thune, South Dakota, weighing in
Thanks,
on
Neil.
all of that. The Senate minority